There are so many chords, and when you start combining them, you get an infinite amount of possibilities. So how are you supposed to go about and compose some music when you don't even know what the chords do? So at first it's overwhelming, but eventually over time, some associations between specific chord sequences and specific emotional content start popping up, and you wonder, is there a deeper logic to this whole tonal system? So I've been thinking about a new way to represent every possible chord change within the basic tonal system. So I'm going to set expectations straight. This does not cover things like mode mixture, secondary dominance, Neapolitan degrees and stuff. This is just about the 7 main degrees and how they interact. Basically, I've been building a map of every possible connection between 2 of those degrees. Let me backtrack a tiny bit for the people that might not be comfortable with the concept of degrees, and then I'm going to show you the map. Let's pretend we're in C major. We can build a chord on every note of the scale by stacking up thirds using only the white keys. Chords number 1, 4, and 5 are going to be major. Chords number 2, 3, and 6 are going to be minor. And the 7th chord is going to be diminished. A useful way of organizing these chords is representing the parallel nature of the major and minor groups. So doing 6, 2, 3, 6 is basically the minor equivalent of doing 1, 4, 5, 1. And 7 is just left alone in a corner. Sorry, 7. When we do that, it becomes obvious why musicians talk about major and minor relatives. Here we can see that A minor is C major's minor relative, not only because it's 3 half steps lower, but because it plays the same role in the musical cosmos, the role of tonic chord, one in the major realm and one in the minor realm. In the same way, D minor and F major are mutually relative, playing the role of subdominant or predominant, whereas the 3rd and 5th degree both play the role of dominant chords, which is to say they strongly suggest a return to the tonic chord. So that's the traditional way of thinking about harmony. Okay, so buckle up because this is pretty cool. First of all, you need to realize that there's only 3 dimensions of movement within the tonal system. What I mean by dimension is a direction that you can move into. This would also be true for melodies, but for now we'll just apply this to harmony. You can either move in seconds, move in thirds, or move in fourths. There is nothing else you can do. Everything else is just an inversion of one of those 3. For instance, if you go from C major to A minor, you might be thinking, hey, I'm leaping up a 6th. But wait a minute, a 6th is just an inversion of a 3rd. Same thing if you go from C to G, you might be thinking, oh, I'm leaping up a 5th. Actually, you're just going down a 4th. So this just clarifies the field of harmonic possibilities. There aren't that many options. If you're currently sitting on a C major chord in your piece of music and you want to change chord, well, you can either go up or down a 2nd, up or down a 3rd, or up or down a 4th. Okay, so we've got these 3 dimensions of movement. A great example of a song that moves mostly in seconds is the all-time classic Lean on Me, with its progression from the 1st degree to the 4th degree and then back. But what happens if you go all the way up the octave? You're going to loop back on C, of course. So these dimensions of movement are actually cyclical and not linear. If you're moving in thirds, then you're going to need 2 octaves to go back to the original C, since you're skipping notes. Let's make a circle out of that too. A great example of a song that moves exclusively in thirds is Connotations d'un autre été l'après-midi by Jan Tiersen, which goes like this: E minor, G major, B minor, D major. Now, this is in G major, of course, but if you transpose it back to C, that would correspond to A minor, C major, E minor, G minor. So basically 6, 1, 3, 5. It's leaping up from 3rd to 3rd. Then the last possible type of movement is in the dimension of fourths. It's much easier to find examples of this because this basically recreates the cycle of fifths, which you've been hearing your whole life, whether you noticed it or not, from Mozart to Flying to the Moon to Autumn Leaves to I Will Survive. The reason why people have been talking more about the cycle of fifths rather than the cycle of fourths, I think, is because they want to evoke some sort of tonal gravity with a cascade of fifths falling on each other, rather than fourths going up and up and up. But it's essentially the same cycle. This cycle of fourths requires 3 octaves before getting back to the tonic. So we have these 3 dimensions of movement, and we've noticed that they all loop back to C eventually, just at different scales. Let's just add one final touch. There it is, the complete map of every possible chord change within the basic tonal system. Any chord sequence you can think of will be represented here. Now, on to the more controversial part of this video. I don't pretend to be the final judge on tonal music and all the symbols it contains. The associations that I'm about to present here are fully subjective, but they've been mostly coherent in my experience of music as I've been composing hundreds of songs and listening to many more. The core idea behind this analysis is, instead of thinking about chords as different musical objects with isolated characteristics, I've been trying to focus on the relationship between the chords. Like, what does it mean to go from 4 to 5? If you transform the harmony from D minor to A minor, what effect is this going to have on the harmonic landscape? We will start with what is normally called the cycle of fifths, which is this rotation here. It will allow us to establish the basic stereotypes of each degree. It's the most obvious to start with because it kind of follows the hero's journey. I've talked about this in a previous video if you want to go deeper on the individual characteristics of the 7 degrees, the secret meaning of the tonal system. Of course, in all those cycles, the C chord is going to be considered as the resting point, the point of homeostasis, we're at peace. So going from C to F really provides a fresh feeling of something new happening, partly because F is not really present in the harmonics of C. Also because F is the 5th below C, it provides a feeling of falling on something bigger and older than C. There's almost like a motherly warmth to it, like a big blanket. The 4th degree is a deeply emotional chord. Crossing over to the 7th degree, B diminished, is like some terrible drama unfolding. As we ramp up the dissonance considerably, it's like a terrible blow has been dealt to the harmonic landscape. Going from B to E is crossing over from a state of alarm to a state of despair, anger, frustration. Often the 3rd degree, especially if it's going to A minor, it's going to be switched to a major chord to make this emotional state even more intense. But in any case, as we resolve to A minor, we're sort of accepting the truth of the drama that has just happened. There's some feeling of getting to a temporary resting point here because A minor is the minor relative of the tonic chord C, so we're kind of hitting a stable point on the minor side. If you keep going to D minor, now suddenly you're past the point where things start to get better again. The days are becoming shorter, so to speak. To me, D minor, and this is subjective, but to me, D minor is a symbol of resignation, of kind of opening up to the possibility of moving back towards consonance. Because D minor could go to G if we choose to follow the cycle of fifths, causing an immediate clarification and lightening and brightening of the texture. Or if we choose to move in seconds, it could go back to E minor, causing a heightening of the dramatic tension. So this D minor is really a fork in the road because it could lead to minor chords or to major chords. And of course, going from G to C is the typical happy resolution. We're going back to the stable state. So often it's like too happy for life on earth. So we're gonna add some extensions and stuff to make it more realistic. One of the things I love to do when I compose is to take this path but in reverse, or sections of it. So if you go C, G, this one's pretty common. You're just making a very, very sunny and optimistic statement. G to D minor will be very much like a setback, because if you're on G, you're expecting to go to C major, happy resolution, or worst case, you're going to go to A minor with a deceptive cadence, but at least you'll get some kind of repose there. But if you go back to D minor, you're sort of backtracking your footsteps, hence the feeling of setback. A great example of this is a piece by Olafur Arnalds named Saman, where the 5th degree keeps going back to the 2nd degree quite dramatically, and then the character is trying to hike back up the mountain again, only to be thrown at the bottom again, a kind of tragic loop. D minor to A minor is a minor plagal cadence. If you go through the cycle, but on the other side, you'll hit 2 plagal cadences, 1 minor and 1 major. Plagal cadence is basically a way of saying we're doing 4-1, or 2-6 if you're in minor, in contrast with perfect cadences, which are 5-1. So going from D minor to A minor kind of suggests you're shying away from something. You prefer to go back to the sadness instead of moving forward in the light. This is why it conveys a sense of closedness or smallness. Also, D minor and A minor are exactly the same chord harmonically, even if you add sevenths. So it's kind of a closed system. If you go from A minor to E minor, this is going to be quite epic in atmosphere. The jump to a minor chord a 5th above or a 4th below will be felt as quite dramatic, possibly suggesting sacrifice or pain or intensity, especially if you put the E minor chord in the first inversion, so with a G as a bass note, which will create a descending bass line from A to G, which will result in some kind of dramatic effect. This one is tricky because if you go E minor to B diminished, my ear kind of projects an immediate resolution on C major, which would be a quick way to get back to stability. But if you really intend to stay on this B diminished, then it creates a much more complex situation, which is hard to understand musically. So B diminished to F, I love this one, especially if you're adding a seventh on the B chord, creating a B minor 7 flat 5 chord. It's very easy to go to the F chord from there, and it creates this kind of magical, mysterious atmosphere, which is not unrelated to the Lydian mode. You can check out this video if you want. Going from F to C is the second plagal cadence, the major one, which is often used at the end of religious pieces to evoke eternal peace. It's more peaceful than a perfect cadence because when you do a perfect cadence, at least one of the voices, the one containing the leading tone, has to go up from B to C. But when you do F-C, all the voices can just sort of fall back on the resolution notes, just softly letting go. Another way to get a similar effect is to go 2-1, replacing the F chord with its minor relative. Gospel music often uses these kind of patterns, and again I would associate that with some kind of deep rest, although the minor chord darkens the picture a little bit. On the other hand, when you go from C to D minor, it can suggest many things, but one of them is a feeling of resignation, especially in classical music where we often have this D minor chord in its first inversion, because it's like, yes, we're on a minor chord now, but it's pointing quite obviously to a perfect cadence. If you don't get this perfect cadence, one of the other options is just to go D minor, E minor. And so because the two chords are exactly the same, this can feel like a heightening of the musical tension, just because it's the same thing, but you crank it up one notch higher. Then if you keep going from E minor to F, it's like you've crossed the minor chord desert and now you're hitting upon some kind of oasis or refuge. This can be one of the most emotional chord progressions in the entire tonal system, because E can be a symbol for despair, loneliness, isolation. So when you cross over to F, it's like finding some warmth and support. Going from F to G is pretty classical. It's a bit like the major equivalent of going from 2 to 3. So again, two identical chords, except you put sevenths on them, in which case they're not identical, but two identical triads, and you're just cranking up a notch in between them in terms of intensity, but on the happy side of things. G to A minor is also extremely common. It's a classic deceptive cadence, as we call it in classical music theory. It's just basically you're pretending that you're going to be going from G to C in the land of fourths, but instead you move in the land of seconds and you go from G to A minor. This works because the leading tone B is able to find its expected resolution on C, even though the fundamental is different. A minor to B diminished is pretty dark. Essentially you're saying, I'm going to be staying in the minor keys for a while, pointing at a perfect cadence in A minor. But you can also choose to resolve directly the B diminished chord to C. In fact, in classical music theory, the 5th degree and the 7th degree have always been conflated together because they're both used in a way as to be variants of each other, both causing a bright resolution to the tonic. On the other hand, if you go from C to B diminished, you're kind of creating chaos, and it's too soon to say where this is going to lead, so it's kind of a big question mark. In pretty much the same way that B diminished can resolve to C, it can also resolve to A minor without any difficulty, suggesting pain, darkness, but some kind of stability because A minor is the minor tonic. When you're going from A minor to G though, you're kind of switching from the minor realm to the major realm. It comes with a relief of the tension because G major essentially contains a promise of resolution to C major. If you're not ready to do that yet, an elegant way to challenge expectations is to go to F instead, which will have a soothing effect. Often a way to temper a little bit the exuberant nature of the perfect cadence is to go 5-4-1. It's just to go through the 4th degree as an intermediate between 5 and 1. If you cross the line from F to E minor though, it's going to be the opposite of what we discussed earlier, suggesting a sense of immediate and poignant loss, maybe a sense of solitude with the fragility associated with the 3rd degree. To me, E minor going to D minor is kind of a faltering, having a weight on your shoulders and you're not able to carry it, so you just fall down. On its own, it's a quite depressing chord progression. And again, D minor to C will get you to a state of peace, but maybe with a little extra nostalgia added. By the way, fun fact, when you organize the notes in thirds, you can see every chord of the key represented if you just connect 3 notes in a row. If you connect 4 notes in a row, you'll get all the chords of the key, but with sevenths. So that's pretty neat. So moving straight from C to E minor is quite a dramatic gesture, even if you're just changing one note. It's a good way to express some kind of loneliness, because if you're on this E minor, then you have nowhere to turn to except A minor, which is a symbol of sadness. If you move past that directly into a G chord, well then that's a happy surprise, conveying an element of unexpected strength. and ease. Like I said earlier, G major and B diminished are pretty much cousins. So you can very easily go from one to the other, more often transforming a G chord into a B diminished chord, ramping up the tension, because when you add the F that's contained in the B diminished chord to the G harmony, you get a tritone between B and F, which makes the eventual resolution even more satisfying. A weird chord progression is going from B diminished to D minor, which I'm not even sure I've heard properly before. Probably I have, but to me it would suggest some kind of miscalculation almost, going from this very tense diminished chord to an unrelated minor chord. Like an unfortunate surprise. A beautiful harmonic gesture consists of transforming this D minor chord into an F major chord, immediately brightening up the mood and softening everything while staying in the same ethos. There's a really strong bridge between F and D minor in the tonal system, and their notes can be meshed together to create a unique variation of this particular vibe, which is the subdominant vibe. If your F is too cheesy, you can just sprinkle a little bit of D in your harmony and you'll get a less exuberant version of the same chord. F to A minor is a staple of dramatic film music. So we're avoiding the fifth degree, which would be too obvious and too happy, and we're going straight from this solace of peace that we found directly into sadness. Whole pieces have been built with these two chords. And then jumping straight from the minor relative to the major tonic is as close to a net gain as you can get in music. It's just the same thing, but happy. Sad, happy. Conversely, if you're going from the tonic to the minor relative, nothing crazy is happening, you're just shading a little bit the harmonic texture. Going to F from A minor can almost feel like a stopper, a buoy that prevents you from sinking deep into these minor chords below. Hence the redemption vibes of this progression, which is also quite epic. F to D minor is a staple of classical music, so often in these perfect cadences, you'll get F, then D minor, or the F is going to be transformed into a D minor rather, symbol of resignation, and then you get the joy of the fifth degree, going back to the peace of the first degree. You could also interject a D minor chord in the middle of a plagal cadence, going 4, 2, 1. By the way, since all the chords of this loop are located 1/3 apart, they will always have two notes in common. So it's very, very easy to voice the transitions from one chord to the next in this dimension, because all you have to do is move one note up or down. D minor to B diminished is a very interesting chord progression, just adding this little bit of hesitation and uncertainty to an already minor chord because of the very unpredictable nature of the seventh degree that could go pretty much anywhere. Transforming the B diminished chord to a G major chord will assuredly result in a clarification of the dominant function, like clouds being swept away or focus being achieved. Resolving the G chord to an E minor chord is rather unusual, but it's an interesting way to suggest a missed opportunity or bad news. Finally, moving down from E minor to C, to me, conveys a sense of delicacy, of softness, because you're just moving one little note and peace is being restored. So it's a very subtle chord progression, and also it's a sort of deceptive cadence in reverse, because we would expect this E minor chord to go to an A chord, the minor relative, but instead it's going straight to the major tonic. Okay. I know this is a lot, but that was kind of my goal for today. It was just to lay it out in front of you guys. And again, this is not a universal law. It's just a result of my own personal neural network when prompted on each of these sequences. If you disagree with some or all of these associations, please tell me in the comments below. I want to hear about it. Thank you for watching, and see you next time on the Music Space Station.